Dr. Tessa Bailey here from the Opus Centre. I am joined by an excellent panel today. I'll be introducing the panellists later. I'll be starting with a bit of a presentation about how you might develop an integrated mental health strategy. I'm also joined by my colleague from the Opus Centre, Kevin St. Mark, and he'll be helping to moderate the questions. So please put that through. After the presentation, I will introduce my incredible panel. I've also got a question for each of those panel members, and then we'll hand over for some discussion and further Q&A with our audience. So thank you for everybody who is joining us today to talk about developing an integrated mental health strategy. When I'm looking at a mental health strategy, I want to see the policies, practices, procedures, all the systems that it could relate to in your organisation for supporting individual worker mental health, and also for supporting the work-related factors that we know have an impact on the mental health and the productivity, well-being of our workers. So I like to think about the mental health continuum, which a lot of people are probably already aware of. What we know about this mental health continuum is it shows us that all of us could be moving in and out of different areas of mental health, good health and well-being at any given time in our lives. There could be particular life events or personal health conditions or work-related factors that might mean that at times we're struggling with our health. And we would need to then implement some self-care, some strategies. And if that doesn't work to get us back to a good place of recovery, then we might need to go seek some additional practitioner support. And workplaces can certainly support individuals with self-identifying, with accessing those supports, and also resource their leaders to see and identify those symptoms and support workers to get back to that place of good health. But when it comes to the work-related factors, we need to see clearer policy, practice, procedure for how we're managing that risk, because our workplaces have become increasingly cognitively demanding and complex in those cognitive demands. This graph shows how back in 1987, the greatest percent of skill required across our Australian workforce was for routine and manual labour. And over time, that has been trending down. And in about 2005, it's the non-routine and more complex cognitive demands that now are the greatest percent of skill required in our Australian workforce. In fact, the latest Productivity Commission statistics show us that 90% of Australians are employed in service-related industries. So we are now seeing the greatest demand of our workers is often related to cognitive, emotional, and other social contexts within the work environment. Those have the potential to harm. And if that is where our greatest risk is, then our systems need to be attending to managing those factors. We've seen a lot of good promotion of the integrated model. So that's helped organisations to understand that their policy, practice, procedure for protecting worker mental health needs to be about preventing harm, promoting the positive, and supporting recovery if a worker is exposed to a hazard or if they're struggling with some symptoms for poor mental health. So how do we create a strategy that is going to integrate those systems into our organisation? The steps that I recommend that I would use with my clients involve identifying key personnel and even some aspects of preparation before you even start to draft your strategy, so you can ensure that you're prioritising what is the most required to protect your workers' mental health and support and promote their well-being. So going through each of those steps briefly so that we can get to more discussion with our panel. Think about the key personnel in your organisation. Each of them play a role. You might not have all people involved at all times in all aspects, but each of them will have a particular contribution to the policies, the systems, the procedures protecting worker mental health. And they should be included in the development of that strategy at appropriate times. Potentially consider creating a working group, especially if you're a large organisation. Consider creating a working group of certain key personnel while you're developing that strategy. You might want to look at what you already have in your organisation. You would have a lot of policy that already relates either directly or indirectly how to manage work-related factors, and how to support individual worker health. So re-familiarise yourself with that policy. In particular, if you're reviewing it, think about any reference to health should be applicable to psychological as well as physical health. And any reference to safety should incorporate a component of psychosocial safety, looking at the psychological and the social aspects that could be impacting worker health. Now, Kevin's going to share these links for you, because I also want you to, before you draft your strategy, have a look at the resources in particular in your region. Each jurisdiction will have their own particular unique resources, expectations. Some of them have really good codes of practice. A lot of them have really good resource material. If you haven't looked in your region in the last year, you're probably missing out on a lot of updates because there's been a lot of activity. And if you can't find something in your region that you think would be suitable to support you or your mental health strategy, maybe have a look in the other regions. There is a lot of good resource material. Just find something that works for you. Also, for outside other resources, in particular, I like the Developing a Workplace Mental Health Strategy How-To Guide by Heads Up, but other people might find some good information that's appropriate for their industry or organisation from some of the other sources out there. And there's even more than these. But what I really want you to do is be clear about the needs, the priorities in your organisation. All the latest updates in codes and regulations, the amendments that we've seen, all follow the best practice of identifying the factors that impact worker health, in particular mental health, giving a sense of priority to where most of the attention, the priority of what needs to be attended to, and implement strategies, actions, goals, targets, and then review and evaluate. So to be able to identify and prioritise those needs, you need to be able to look at what are the sources of information in your organisation that's going to tell you where the most needs are. In a small organisation, I'm more likely to see one-on-one conversations, maybe some team meetings, maybe some items on agendas. As we move into a more medium-sized organisation, there might need to be more strategic methods of collecting that data. And by the time you get to a large organisation, it really is the most efficient to implement some kind of survey. And the reason is that we need to try to gather the perceptions of the workforce in an efficient manner that considers accessibility and anonymity and the different needs. And we often find that surveys, in particular a tailored survey, could be a good source of that information. When I'm working with organisations, we often see a lot of the data that's been collected in the past has very much focused on the current status of worker health, and that information can be interesting. But what we like to know is, what about those work-related factors that we know are having an impact on mental health? Do we have high levels of job demand? If we do, then we need to attend to that. But more importantly, when I'm trying to design interventions, actions, strategies, I like to look at the lead indicators, particularly in large organisations. They give me the information about the quality of the existing systems to achieve appropriate levels of job demands for different individuals, for different groups, appropriate, adequate resources to support people with those job demands, again, for different individuals, different teams, different divisions, and different groups. So those lead indicators, I think, are really important for understanding whether or not what you're actually doing is achieving that psychological safety that you would want for the mental health practices in your organisation. So with that information, you would then know more about what content you want to target in your strategy. Now, what could be in a strategy? It is a bit different to a policy, and I think that's for good reason. With a formal policy, that's something I'll more likely see in a very large organisation. They need to be really clear about some expectations, some standards. They need to create that consistency across a lot of people, across a lot of groups, divisions, and leaders. Whereas a strategy can be a little bit more tailored to suit what you think works for your organisation. It will guide the practice. It will guide the procedures. I like that it has more actions and more goals And then we can also include to what extent you're currently managing through systems, but then it can include some additional actions and goals. It can then be reviewed over a certain period of time, and it can be updated as part of ongoing continuous improvement. So what might you include if you were looking to draft a strategy? In a small organisation, they could probably just have a bit of a commitment statement and then maybe a few paragraphs addressing the main factors they know impact worker mental health and how they might support an individual who's showing symptoms for poor health. In a medium-sized organisation, I'm likely to see maybe a few pages covering those aspects. In a large organisation, again, there's going to be more clear content, guidance, direction that can be implemented across the groups and teams. Some of that's also going to be impacted by industry as well. So in a manufacturing organisation, I might see a few of those factors being clearly addressed in relation to maybe workload and demands. But in another organisation, I might see a lot more detail about emotional demands, remote working conditions, client or customer aggression. But in general, you'll want to provide some background, some context. I often see the mental health continuum in a lot of these strategies. I see reference to the integrated model, if you think that works for you, to guide your organisation in the development of and the implementation of that particular strategy. I do like when I see particular acknowledgement of the way an organisation supports individual mental health, whether or not an individual is being impacted by external life events or potentially the work-related factors. I then like to see that level of priority in the identified work-related psychosocial factors that we know are impacting workers in your organisation. And then I prefer when I can see a bit of a breakdown of what you're currently doing, and then some good reasoning behind some reasonable, practicable actions and strategies that you want to implement over a particular period of time, which you will then evaluate to see if that works. And a few of my clients are using the psychosocial safety hierarchy of control. And that's because they find that this helps guide them through for any factor, if it's workload, emotional demand, if it's senior priority, management trust, whether it's leadership action, we can go through this hierarchy and determine, well, what are the policies at the very top that either directly or indirectly relate to that factor? How is that being implemented at the different levels? What are the responsibilities for HR? How does that be included in recruitment, onboarding, ongoing training? Perhaps for workforce health and safety, how is that risk being managed with their systems, their assessments, any hazard registers? We also want to see how is that being implemented, those practices for managing that factor at the leadership level. How can we support and resource and train confident and competent leaders for managing work-related factors? How are we managing the job design component directly? How are we setting, informing, managing workload, emotional demands, appropriate workplace behaviours, adequate resources, and also clear expectations for the worker? If you provide the safe systems of work through your mental health strategy, they will be expected to interact with those systems in a manner that protects their own and protects their co-workers' mental health. Once you've drafted your strategy, hopefully you would have some involvement from your key representatives putting together that draft, and then you would want to demonstrate how you've consulted with the wider workforce. And again, with consideration for, are you providing the best opportunity for consultation, taking into account the particular nature of your workforce? And if possible, please document your consultation. I think the new regulations will be looking to see that type of documentation. When you go to implement your strategy, you will want to be clear about who's responsible for which aspects. Are the senior executives responsible for conveying their priority for the strategy? Is workforce health and safety responsible for managing the actions and monitoring the ongoing risk? And we would want to provide any resources that can support those actions. Do your leaders need particular training in how to identify symptoms for poor mental health? Is there benefit of greater awareness raising amongst your staff about managing, self-identifying and self-care? We would want to see some regular networking. We find that that really supports implementations of strategies and action plans. If people know there's a particular time that they're going to get back together, it holds a level of accountability as they share to what percent have they implemented certain actions, certain aspects of the strategy. And also they can resource and support each other, adjust resources, have learnings about any barriers, share any facilitators, and gives workforce health and safety an opportunity to monitor the implementation. If possible, I recommend setting milestones, and also you can put KPIs on certain aspects. There might be parts of your strategy that it just doesn't feel appropriate to put a KPI on, but where you can and you do think that's appropriate, it can really help see with the progress of implementation for that strategy. And then that will help you when you go to evaluate and review. You can have a look at, well, to what extent were the various goals, the various actions put in as a measurable milestone? Have you documented some of those processes? If possible, I again want to recommend documenting processes for consultation and for how you're actually conducting your review. And that information can actually help you as part of your continuous improvement process. For large organisations, I think regular surveillance of lead indicators will help you to determine if your mental health strategy has been successful in reducing the risks to worker psychological health. So each organisation is unique. They will need to determine a strategy that suits them. There's no defined template. You can have a look at those, but find one that works for you. It should suit the size of your organisation, the types of factors your people are exposed to. I would expect to see information about core factors, lead indicators, cognitive demands, if there's emotional demands, appropriate workplace behaviour. Those are core factors that exist across any occupation in any industry. And then particular hazards for your people as well. Are they exposed to customer client aggression, traumatic events material, remote hybrid working, fatigue? You might benefit from investing in some external consultation or training, especially when you're initially developing and integrating and implementing your strategy. But in theory, I'd like to see in time that initial investment, everything becomes embedded and integrated, and therefore you're doing ongoing management, and it gets clearer about where you might need to bring consultants in at key components. But where you can integrate it into your regular systems for workforce health and safety, the more that you're able to do that and effectively reduce risk, sustain that over time, you can expect to see a wide range of benefits to your work environment, to your workers' health, productivity, turnover, a range of injury incidents and the costs associated. You should see better outcomes. So what I'm going to do now is introduce my excellent panel. And I have a question for each of my panel members. But first, let me introduce, we have joining us, Mark Leopold. He has extensive experience in the development of evidence-based policy and strategy to more effectively support workplace mental health and promote wellbeing. Mark has worked with organisations to deliver programs focusing on promoting the benefits of good work, managing risks, and supporting people in need. His leadership experience is across a diverse array of companies. He has previously been the head of workplace engagement at Beyond Blue. And he understands effective visible action that's needed to protect worker mental health within that organisational context that also helps productivity and performance outcomes. He's an advocate for better mental health, and being aware of his own triggers and signs and symptoms, he can help others to build resilience and learn how to adapt to life's demands. He's shared his experience with over 100 different agencies and presented at many events and has helped many to achieve their best possible mental health. I'll also be introducing Fiona Andrew, who, with a passion for creating psychologically healthy workplaces, she leads Australia Post's team for health and wellbeing. She's an experienced psychologist in areas of wellness and clinical psychological health. So she's been delivering this psychological health and safety wellbeing strategy in Australia Post, which is a workforce of 65,000 people. The goal for Australia Post is to promote positivity, influence positive mental health outcomes within the organisation, but also the broader community. So there's a focus on good practice that supports those experiencing mental ill health, and also on managing the risks associated with psychological health. She has a team that was recently announced a finalist for an ARI award for this year. So we've got, for Australian Human Resource Institute Award, we've got our fingers crossed for that. Sandra Lamb is also joining us. She is an organisational psychologist, managing director of FIFO Focus. It's a psychology firm that empowers individuals to become more mentally resilient and for organisations to manage the complexities of supporting worker psychological health. Her team are committed to assisting organisations to integrate and embed psychological health and safety practices so that it becomes business as usual. She's worked for over 2 decades and has experience in public and private sectors in Australia and overseas. In her career, she's assisted organisations to improve their performance by making workplaces safer, more engaging and more enjoyable. And she recently won an award from the Workforce Health and Safety Foundation for leadership in workforce health and safety. So I have an excellent panel and I'm going to utilise their experience and their knowledge, starting with Mark. Mark, can I ask you, reflecting on your experience with managing a personal mental health condition, what would you look for in a workplace to feel a sense of psychological safety?
Thank you, Tessa, and welcome everyone. And can I just say, Tessa, thanks for your presentation. It's the first time I've sat in on it and very insightful. And just to build on, I guess, what Tessa has noted, I am speaking today not as a clinician or as a researcher. I come from a commercial background. I've been in the workplace mental health space now for about a decade. But it is today that I'll be leaning on my personal experience with clinical depression, and therefore it's sort of in the context of your question, Tessa, I guess I reflect a little differently and maybe counterintuitively in terms of what we might consider a mentally healthy workplace. I like to go back to the evidence, and you presented some really interesting evidence there, and essentially I think you also pointed out the fact of many roles aren't so much around routine anymore, it's around complexity. And therefore, when we think about the evidence, we know the issues that are associated with role clarity in complex environments, workloads, job demands, managing resources, the level of control people have, work design, bullying, you've mentioned them. And therefore, often the conversation, and in my view, the reflection on what a mentally healthy workplace is not so much around a conversation around mental health all the time, although albeit that's important. It's actually as much or anything around acknowledging that we actually do need to have these difficult, challenging and often complex conversations around these topics that we've just mentioned, that the evidence is there. And so I think a mentally healthy workplace is one that does encourage that, is one that where in meetings you'll see issues brought to the table early. You'll see people actually questioning or actually openly saying, look, I'm having trouble prioritising here, or I'm not clear on the outcomes, or whatever the case might be. To me, these are indicators of a workplace that's at least heading in the right direction. Because what you're starting to do in the context of individuals and managers, and it doesn't matter whether you're sitting there as the CEO or senior executive of a team, in operational leadership or indeed just influence in your operational role, the ability to have these discussions to address the key risk factors that often come to play in small, medium or large organisations is what then allows us to, I guess, collectively come to some kind of solution around some of those issues. So whilst we'll often say it's about awareness and understanding of a mental health condition or awareness and understanding of mental health more generally, that is absolutely critical, and I'm not saying it's not. And indeed all the work that we do to combat stigma, to encourage people to talk about conversations. When it gets down to it, what we actually want to do is go back to the evidence, go back to what we know can cause dysfunction and distress in organisations, and see actively the organisation and the individuals in that organisation working towards resolving those through conversations in their day-to-day roles. I guess the next thing I'll say is that it's easy to kind of, or maybe not easy, but if we're having those conversations, you then need a team or people that feel safe and supported when raising those issues. And that, that can be complex because you might have pockets of that. You might have a whole organisation that is running smoothly. But at the same time, people are less likely to raise those complex issues if they don't feel safe and supported, if they don't feel that there's trust and respect two-way across either the relationships they've got with their manager, their leader, or where that might sit. And so, you need those elements to align, if you like, for a mentally healthy workplace to really flourish and for people to really succeed. And then I'll finish with one other point, because I know we've got some other panel members and other questions, but I guess I just want to reinforce that workplaces are and can be a stressor, and that's important. But we also need to acknowledge that workplaces can absolutely contribute to good health. And I think that often when we think about mental health, we think about mental illness. Similarly, when we think about the workplace, we think about the stresses and the risks. But we know, again, the evidence is quite clear that good work contributes to good health. And furthermore, is that, I'm trying not to swear. Fiona's seen me enough in presentations to swear, but bad stuff happens outside of the work, right? Life goes on.
It will.
And actually people come to work sometimes to feel connected, to feel valued, to feel part of a team, to feel these aspects that actually help them live a contributing life, help them live a healthy life. And so really important when you run across that continuum that you mentioned, that this isn't a conversation around the 1 in 5 people that may or may not be managing a mental health condition, diagnosed or not. This is about everyone in the workplace. It's about how do we keep the healthy healthy? How do we encourage people to actually reach out early to their peers, to their managers, to independent third parties, EAPs, whatever it might be, early to return to full health? And of course, how do we actually, support people in need? But truthfully, I think that we really need to think that workplaces aren't always the problem here. They absolutely can be a fundamental support and a contributor to good health. And so I've got more stuff to say about shared responsibility. I think I'll park that. I've talked too much. But I hope that sort of gives you some insight to where my head's at, Tessa. Thank you.
That's fabulous, Mark. You highlighted literally some of the topics and discussions I will have day to day, week to week, with so many of my clients that are looking to integrate systems. So just acknowledging these factors exist, even if we see that there's risk, well, that's important to know. That means we need to attend to it. Incorporating the positive, I'm seeing that move towards the positive duty, even in the latest WHO definition. It's not simply the absence of the negative. We actually need to actively create the positive. So thank you so much for touching on those, and let's hear more from you, possibly with some of the other questions. Thanks, Mark. Next, I will be going to Fiona. Fiona, can you tell me what are some tips for strategy implementation based on your experiences at Australia Post?
Thanks, Tessa. Hi, team. Hi, everyone. Tessa, I love talking about this, so you're just going to have to put your finger up and make me stop. And Mark, thank you so much. I love listening to you speak. Our strategy at Australia Post is probably 4 to 5 years old. And aligns to the integrated approach that you spoke to, Tessa, in the APS Mental Health Capability Framework. That strategy has undergone a number of refreshes over the years, and we've had it critically reviewed by Beyond Blue as well twice. And so, we're very, very confident that it's relevant, that it's very practical, it's very risk-focused, but importantly, it's efficiently delivered in the context of a very large and complex workforce. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Parts of our strategy are take an enterprise-wide approach. So we have, foundational programs that help our people from team members right through to leaders, really with the information, the skills, the resources that they need to look after themselves and look after each other's mental health and wellbeing. And there I'm referring to things like our suite of mental health education, our external counselling and coaching supports, our annual calendar of activities, those sort of things. We also ensure our executive and our senior leaders have access to the mental health and wellbeing metrics and information that they need to drive their decision making. And we absolutely collaborate with leading credible organisations that that enable us to deepen our knowledge and allow us to contribute to making positive and systemic change at Australia Post. But the challenge for us is when we came to thinking about how we're going to risk assess this organisation. It is a very large, geographically diverse organisation, very occupationally diverse, multiple business units spanning delivery function, a retail function, internal contact centres, outward-facing contact centres, and all of the support functions that you would expect for an organisation like this. We also have a very large extended workforce. So our permanent population is 36,000 people, but we have another extended workforce of approximately the same amount across our licensees and our delivery contractors. And my function is responsible for looking at risk in those areas as well. So our solution was to break it down. We couldn't do a one size fits all. We implemented business unit specific working groups, and you spoke to building working groups, Tessa, in your presentation, psychological health and safety working groups. At the moment, we have one per business unit, so I have 8 at the moment, and the remit of those groups is really, really clear. They are action-oriented groups that are there to identify and mitigate psychosocial risk through the implementation of plans that are really clear. They call out the actions against the identified risks and that sit against measures and KPIs. And those groups have been running now since late 2019, sort of 2020. We didn't put them in place all at once. We rolled them out one by one and we learnt as we went and modified them, but they've really evolved to become self-sustaining and very effective mechanisms for the identification and control of psychosocial exposure. So to give you a little bit of a sense how they're customised to each of our business units, for instance, in our customer services area, and that's our contact centres, our biggest risk really is around customer aggression. So our work there in the contact centre is very much around looking at how do we mitigate customer aggression, how do we enable our customer service consultants, how do we develop our leaders, how do we put systems in place that will reduce the incidence of customer aggression, including how do we refine and develop our processes so people don't feel upset. There's a number of things that we've done in place, and the working group has driven that work. In our support function of people and culture, we've looked very much at emotional work demands. So for the 700 or so people that work in our people and culture areas, which includes, of course, functions like injury management, payroll, talent, learning and development, employee relations, safety, etc., where people are having very regular conversations, talking with people all the time, often very sensitive conversations, difficult conversations. Emotional work demands are really high. So how have we been able to support people with that, lessen the impact of those? Again, a suite of interventions against that kind of risk. And in deliveries, different issues again, and a big focus there on developing our leaders. We have about 5,500 leaders across Australia Post, so you can imagine the effort of developing all of those leaders and making sure that they feel competent and confident in this area is quite a task in itself. But over time, we've refined this particular framework of working groups so that they're tailored to the needs of each business unit, and they really are about best practice. And part of that is around having a clear charter in place and really clear governance reporting lines through our safety management forum up to our board. So the sort of things that has made this successful for us. So some of my top tips there, it's really, really important to get leadership buy-in. Of course, we talk about that all the time. The buy-in needs to be active though. In principle support is not what we're looking for. We're looking for really active support. That is, that leaders who will join us in fighting the good fight, who will support, promote, allocate resources and so forth. Really important to get the right people in the room in those groups. For us, it's core representatives from the business unit, as well as having human resources in the room, safety in the room, but we also call in learning and development or talent or legal if we need to, depending on what it is that we're working on at that time. It's really important that those groups don't sit around talking about safety, they're actually doing safety. So they're action-oriented groups and they follow a continuous improvement model. We've also found it really important to put in place mandatory education for the members of the working group. That's really about making sure that we're all starting on the same page, we're talking the same language, we've got the same vision, we understand what we're doing. It's been really important for us that we transition the ownership of those groups to the business unit. So they've all started under the direction of the health and wellbeing team, but over time we hand that ownership back so that those business units become self-sustaining. And that's been really important. And so that they become accountable and they own the work that they're doing. Of course, having outcome measures and KPIs are really important, and a reporting line, really clear reporting line. And then communicating back to the broader business what we're doing. You know, we don't want to do this in secret. We want to make sure people know what we're doing, why we're doing, the progress that we're making, and so forth. So there's some of my top tips around putting that particular framework into place. How am I going for time, Tessa? Do you want me to stop?
Oh, yes, I probably should. Also, because that was excellent. That was just excellent in helping, I think, build maybe the confidence of our audience that it can be step by step. That's actually okay. It might involve a scaffolding. It might involve getting clear about what you're already doing. And then it might involve the right people in the right room creating the actions that are a bit more tailored for teams and groups. And that might actually be the most effective way. Also, that continuous improvement that you keep referring to, the reflecting, the learning, and even in my experience with Australia Post, hearing the confidence of those members of the working group and them sharing that the people in their teams feel more confident to raise issues. And if we raise them, we can talk about them, we can address them, we can think about what might be the best strategy, and then starting to understand why some strategies might be effective and why might not. It's really showing that maturity, and it explains why you've been a finalist for some awards. So fingers crossed, and hope to keep seeing great outcomes.
Thanks, Tessa. Can I quickly answer Stephanie's question about training? Stephanie, thank you so much. The training, the induction training that we put our group members through are things like work safe and beyond blue training, some video clips. We make sure they do our mental health education for leaders. That's all about getting a foundational base of knowledge so that people understand what we're talking about when we talk about workplace mental health. We're talking about how we support, how we promote, how we manage risk. That's the kind of training. From there, the groups take their own pathways.
Thank you. And I must say that I've seen consistently good outcomes from levels of training, some general awareness training, some more specific leadership development training, some workforce health and safety, HR specialist training, is consistently across a lot of data showing really good results. Thank you so much. We'll be asking more from Fiona, assuming we have time. Okay, I'll move to Sandra. Thanks again, Fiona. Sandra, what should key employer representatives consider when developing a strategy to ensure it will be effective?
That's a good one. First of all, thank you everyone for presenting. I actually really enjoyed the conversations as well, all the information you provided. When we talk about effectiveness of any intervention, I think you need to measure it. So my recommendation is have some sort of tool that you can measure and remeasure as you progress with the implementation plan. This stuff is hard, and I know we have to remember that. So getting on this journey is going to be tough, and there's a lot of information out there. There's lots of new regulations and not lots of new acts, and it's actually quite confusing for a lot of people. So I'm really glad that there's at least 60 people on this call, and we need to have these conversations quite regularly. It is hard stuff, and we do need to work with each other. My recommendation for anything that's effective is kind of similar to what you all said anyway, move away from just talking about mental health, which is very much focused on the individual, but move towards mentally healthy workplaces, which is focusing on the organisation. So all those organisational factors that both Mark and Fiona talked about, and Tessa talked about as well. I think you need to incorporate both. So in many ways, I prefer to call it a mentally healthy workplace strategy rather than a mental health strategy, because we're still very much focused on the individual. So that's my other recommendation. I'm going to focus on that step 6 that you had, Tessa, which is the implement part. Yes. And I would say, prepare your people, prepare your systems, and prepare to retest. And I'll explain why. And it's probably have to be done in the right order. Training your people up is very important, but the right people for the right type of training as well. We are getting a lot of people trained up on mental health stuff, whether it's mental health literacy, mental health first aid, and all of those things, which are very important, and supervisors knowing how to respond to mental health. But we really also need to train people up on psychosocial health and safety, or psychosocial risk management. And probably what I would do is train up the leadership first. And when I say leadership, I'm talking executives. Then I would train up the health and safety people who are responsible for designing the systems that's going to capture these risks. So whether it's health and safety and HR, maybe some health and safety reps, I would train them up second. And then I would train the rest of the leaders and then the rest of the organization third and fourth, because it needs to happen in that order. The reason being is the second thing I would recommend is you prepare your systems. So I come from the mining sector, where there is rules and regulations that there's just so many. And we are required to develop risk registers and risk management plans and what have you. So I think it's really important that when you've trained your leaders or your executives, and then you train your health and safety people, that the next thing you do before you train the rest of the people is get your systems in place. And this is from a lesson that I've learned. We've trained people up on psychosocial work before, people on the ground, and then they go, great, now I can identify psychosocial hazard. Where do I put it? Oh, there's nothing to capture it somewhere. So that's how I would say, prepare your system when you, before you train the rest of your people. And then you would train the rest of people as well on psychosocial work, but on top of the mental health work. And then finally, I would, like I said very early on in the piece, make sure that you are reassessing. So if you're using whatever tool you're using to check for psychosocial hazards in the workplace, do it again, maybe at least 6 or 12 months later to see how you're progressing. I don't think you can measure effectiveness if you don't have something that's sort of objective like that. So I'd highly recommend something like that. And like I said, again, this work is hard work. Don't be afraid to seek help from external people and each other. There's a lot of noise in the workplace at the moment. There's lots of noise on the internet and LinkedIn. Just be very careful and very discerning with what you're listening to and who you're listening to as well. I think that's all I have to say, because I'm just realizing we've got 5 minutes left.
Also, I think that was really great, and thank you for enhancing some of those points. Definitely, I think some of our audience would have wanted to know which step in what order. There's recommendations for that, and acknowledging that we're learning about what the best practice, in particular for the interventions. That's literally where we're at with the science, with the research, with the practice right now. We've improved understanding, we've improved awareness. We're getting there with the language, but we're still even learning the terms and the definitions. Once we have that shared understanding, then we can be clearer about the right actions at the right time with the right people. But that might shift and change. So if we evaluate before and after, we can have a sense of confidence about what we're doing and if it's working. So thank you so much. Now we've got 15 minutes. Yes, well done. And I'll get Kevin to help us now with maybe some audience questions. And Kevin, if you can direct who you think that might be the best person to answer some of those.
No problems at all. Thank you. And thanks everyone for coming on board and your engagement. I've had some great comments and questions so far. This first one goes to Mark. So we've been talking about lots of actions in the workplace that need to happen to create that mentally healthy workplace. Who should be responsible, do you think, for improving mental health in the workplace?
Thank you, Kevin, and whoever might have asked that question. There's the $1 million question, isn't it? a couple of parts to that. Before I start, can I just acknowledge Stephanie, Maurice and Nick in the chat. I actually responded to you, but actually responded to the hosts and panelists. So my hosts and panelists see the response, but you didn't. But thank you for your feedback on the prior questions or the prior presentation. Kevin, look, there's two parts I think I'll answer this. First of all, it absolutely sits within the leadership and the senior leadership of an organisation, and the CEO in particular, depending on where the organisation is. But I just want to preface that with a piece. I have a pretty strong personal view that there's the importance of shared responsibility, right? Now, Tessa has absolutely mentioned the idea of processes and systems and what is needed within an organisation. And absolutely, we need things like policy, process, systems to manage work health safety risks, including psychosocial safety risks and all the rest of it. And so there, if you like, the baseline and almost the part that starts, we need that as an organisation. And clearly, our senior leaders and leaders need to be able to effectively manage workplace mental health issues, whether they be risks, whether they be opportunities, whatever it might be. And so there's and we've mentioned the importance of training that Sandra's just mentioned, and indeed Tessa and Fiona as well. But I guess I just want to talk about that as individuals, we have an incumbent responsibility too. Right? And I'm particularly here bringing in my own experience with anxiety and depression, the ongoing management of that. That we do have an incumbent individual responsibility to look after ourselves and our own health, not mental health. You know, without all three of those tiers, without effective processes and systems, without leadership support and buy-in and ownership, and without individual responsibility, I think that there's absolutely you know, gaps that can occur. And so I think there's absolutely a need for shared responsibility, Kevin, and whoever asked. However, you know, I've been in so many executive team meetings where that question's been asked by a CEO or a EGM of HR or an EGM of work health safety. And the direct response back is, well, you and this team. And it's about, you know, that understanding that the activities and behaviours of the leadership group influence policy. You can't influence culture, and you can't dictate a culture, but you can certainly influence by your own behaviours. You can, through your behaviours and through how you walk the talk, and indeed how you talk, create an environment where there is permission to talk about the issues that confront the organisation. And creating that idea of permission to talk becomes, you know, pretty pivotal in this. And again, where does that start? It starts with certain you know, leaders. I mean, and I'd be interested in Fiona's view, but you know, there's arguments around, well, does it sit in HR? Does it sit in work health and safety? And in mining, for example, it might sit closer to work health safety than it does in HR in a white collar sort of environment. There's no one right answer, actually. It actually sits in wherever is right for the organisation. And furthermore, we don't want to create a barrier that, oh, it sits with that person, so all of a sudden it's that person's issue, right? No, you know, it's a shared responsibility across the organisation. So, Kevin, I don't know whether I've answered the question, and I'll probably get feedback in the chat if I haven't, but that's how I'd say it. It absolutely sits with the senior leadership and indeed the head of the organisation, but there is an incumbent shared responsibility that we all need to lean into.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Mark. We have a couple more questions coming through. So this one from Mark. Great presentation all. Would someone please speak to the workplace culture and leadership maturation in supporting successful outcomes towards continuous improvement? So I guess that's really about, how do we build that workplace culture and leadership? And trying to get those successful outcomes and continuous improvement. And I think, Fiona, you're probably in a great position to talk to that. You're starting to do a lot of that continuous improvement already at Australia Health, Opus, sorry. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Kevin. Thanks for the question, Morris. I can see I've got it up in front of me so that I don't lose track of it. Look, I think the work of the health and wellbeing team is really part of building that workplace culture at Australia Post. one thing that is really important to us is to make sure we align really well with other parts of the business who are working in the leadership and the workplace culture part. So whether that's our capability departments, learning and development, our safety culture teams, we're a big organisation, so there's lots of us chipping away at this from different directions, and that's been really important, that the work we do integrates and embeds into those other pieces of work and aligns well with them. The leadership piece I spoke a little bit about before. We have a lot of leadership programs at Australia Post. The mental health education for our leaders is a standalone piece, but it also contaminates other pieces of leadership training that we have as well. So we make sure that it sits, parts of that sit in other leadership. That is so that if a leader does some leadership training on culture or change management or on safety culture, they'll also be picking up that mental health piece as well. So sort of making sure that we're all aligned and we're all sort of moving in the same direction is really important. It's a work in progress. You know, it doesn't stop. So in terms of maturation, we're not at the end of the journey. We're well on the journey, but we are certainly still on that journey and still have a way to go. I hope that answers the question.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Fiona. Okay, just moving through these questions, so coming through thick and fast. Next question, does ISO 45003, which is the international standard on psychosocial risks, start addressing the systems and processes required to improve organisational psychological health and safety requirements? And I might pass that to Sandra.
Sure, thank you. The short answer is yes. The long answer is it's actually not very prescriptive, and it's probably designed that way mainly because ISO 45003 is only a guide and it is best practice, of course, so we need to get there. So being prescriptive is not going to work for every organisation, but it's a really good tool. I use 45003 when I help clients develop their strategy, and I'll say it's aligned to 45003 because that's where we want to head to. But a majority of organisations are nowhere near that. So I don't want to make that a must do because that's a really major gap. I would say meet the organisations where they're at. ISO 45003 is what we should be aiming for, but the steps we need to take are much lower than that, and so go slow with it. But it's a really great framework. So I would recommend that if you haven't read it, go and read 45003.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sandra. And just so you know, also on the Opus website, we do have a self-audit that you can take just to indicate whether you are up to that standard or not. It's quite rather than going through the whole standard, it's quite easy. I think 40 questions or so asking you about your current health and safety systems and whether they're up to that psychosocial standard. So thank you very much again, Sandra. We've got another question come through. So how would you recommend finding the balance between short-term fixes versus coping strategies versus instant capability, and long-term fixes versus coping strategies versus sustainable capability? I might flick that one to Mark, if that's okay.
Yes. Before I get there, I just want to quickly just reinforce something Fiona said, because I have some insight into how Australia Post have worked through their working groups, and she mentioned it in her presentation as well. When on that piece around culture, don't underestimate the importance of having the different working groups that are spread across the different functions of the organisation. I think Fiona beautifully sort of articulated that, you know, the different needs and priorities come out of those different working groups, and that allows, the organisation to focus in the right places and prioritise. But it also does so much for the culture at a ground level that have different languages, say in operations to HR to whatever it might be, to deliveries. And so the cultural piece, yes, there is an influence from above, and about our values and all the rest of it that we'll put into an organisation. But please don't underestimate the again, for larger organisations, the importance of those working groups and spreading it across the organisation like Australia Post have done. On the context of all the balance of the short term and long term, for the sort of simplicity, I know the question was a bit more complex than that. I think that it points to what Tessa was saying, that so often we'll enter an organisation that is in a reactive mode and are doing a whole bunch of ad hoc things that in and of themselves are great, right? Might be something to do with World Mental Health Day, World Mental Health Month, Are You OK Day, some of those anchor days. It might be other stuff that just happens sporadically throughout the year. But it's the high level strategy, or at least plans, that link them all together. We so often come in and organisations say, oh, we're not doing a lot, but when we actually bring it in under the umbrella, there actually is quite a lot that's being done. What needs to occur, though, is, of course, that balance between, yes, we need to help people and support people that are in need, but how do we actually get ahead of the way? Right? How do we actually get ahead of that and ensure that we're having conversations throughout the year and not just when a fire is burning in a different part of the organisation? So it sounds simplistic, but I don't think it is, in that without an overarching strategy plan, without a risk assessment, without those type of broader pieces, then you really don't have the map that allows you to sort of navigate. It's not a point in time. You don't have a strategy and all of a sudden mental health within an organisation is fixed. It's an evolution, as Fiona's mentioned, as Sandra's mentioned. It is something that you don't fix. Work health safety within an organisation, physical health and safety evolves. All those aspects evolve. You just need to get it under a part where it's part of the DNA of your organisation, part of the planning, part of the systems, part of the processes, part of the conversation. That helps balance the short term and the long term, I think.
I'll slowly start wrapping up. So unfortunately, because this incredible conversation from these amazing experiences, I think really help people move from just the broader, we want to prioritise, be aware of mental health, to what do we actually do? And that combination of short-term and long-term, I so agree. I've had the ability now to work with some organisations for a long-term, and some of the long-term might take more time, especially in an existing organisation. And we have to take into account resources and time and priorities. So as I see the long term, I also see some short term, reasonable, practical strategies that I'll have a manager go, wow, that worked way better than I thought it would. But also I want to see people attending to symptoms, hazards as they're arising. So I will want to see a combination. I will want to see that maturity and understanding what is working. And if something isn't working as designed, is it worthy of the time, energy, effort as a resource? But I really want to encourage people that, as I've seen some of the short-term gains, some of the long-term development, that I really see a bit of a snowball effect happening for organisations that can find things that work for them. And then we see an increase in the capacity, the capability, and that's where we start to see it become embedded and integrated. But it is okay to have a strategy that takes some time with some longer-term goals, but please do incorporate something that you think is reasonable, practical, that you can action, that aligns with the theory and the needs and the priorities for the people in your particular team, in your organisation as well. Other than that, we've got our last minute. So it's really sad. I think we'll have to have a part 2. I'll have to ask all of my amazing panel members maybe to come back next year, and we can actually share more of these really practical applied experiences. So yes, hopefully next year we'll be able to get back together and share more learning and increase this understanding and awareness in this really exciting. I like all the positivity and the optimism and the faith and belief that we can address even the complex issues within our work environments. In fact, we should. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, my amazing panel, Mark, Sandra, Fiona. Your experience is you just can't capture that and bottle it. If I could, I would. And Kevin, thanks again for always. I have excellent resources and supports because of people like Kevin in my organisation. And then thanks again to Sarah for the opportunity to present and participate, and to all of the audience. Your questions help us to give the information that's needed out there. So thank you for your insightful questions. If you need more, these people are very generous, and I'm just letting everyone know, amazing with their time. If you want to go offline and ask any of these panel members, I do believe they would actually take the time to answer questions offline. So if you find them offline, I think they would be able to keep answering any questions that we haven't had time to get to. But thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tessa. I don't know if you've seen all these comments in the chat, but it's fantastic anyway. So they really appreciated this session.
Thank you.
And I did want to put a link to our academy, because there is another webinar you've done, I think, early in the year, this year. So I'm just going to put that in there so they can access that one. I don't remember the specific title, but yeah, the comments, they really appreciate this, and very interesting, very relevant webinar. So before I leave, thank you for all the panelists too. That was fantastic. It was a really different concept and interesting. Before I leave, we will not be having a webinar next week because we are being allowed out of WA, and we're going to Sydney. And we're going to the IMARC, a mining conference, which apparently is huge. So if you want to say hello or meet us in person, drop in there. It's in the ICC Centre in Sydney, and we can say hello. So thanks you, and any of you guys too. Thank you, everyone. We'll hopefully do something again next year, Tessa. Okay?
Yes, I think so. Keep the conversation going. Thanks
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.